Have you ever held in so many emotions that they burst out all at once, at the most unexpected moment? That's what happened to me that night. The funeral was over, the guests had gone, and then my son locked the door behind us and said something that made my knees weaken. I never expected that moment to change our relationship forever. Before we dive into what really happened, I want to ask, where are you watching from? Are you tuning in from New York, maybe from a quiet town in Ohio, or somewhere out west like California? Let me know in the comments. I always love to see where my listeners are joining from. It makes me feel like I'm not telling this story alone. Now, let me take you back to that night. The house was too quiet. You'd think after hosting over 30 people for a memorial service, I'd welcome the silence. But this quiet wasn't comforting. It was heavy. It pressed on my chest and made every breath feel a little harder than the last. My husband, Thomas, had just been laid to rest. 47 years together. It didn't seem real that he was gone. Steve, my son, had been by my side through it all. From the hospital, to the paperwork, to the eulogy he bravely gave even though his voice shook. He was the kind of son every mother prays for, gentle, dependable, and kind. But there was something in his eyes that day, something that said he was holding back, just like me. After the last of the family left, I went upstairs to my bedroom. I hadn't changed out of my black dress, the one with the lace sleeves Thomas always liked. My feet hurt, my back ached, but mostly my heart throbbed in a way I couldn't explain. I sat down on the edge of the bed and stared at the photo of Thomas and me on our 40th anniversary. He had such a proud smile on his face that day. I heard the creak of the stairs behind me. Steve had come up quietly. He lingered in the doorway for a second before stepping in and gently closing the door. I heard the soft click of the lock. He stood there in his white shirt, sleeves rolled up, the top button undone. His tie was loose around his neck, and his eyes, those deep brown eyes, were focused on me with a look I couldn't quite place. "Mom," he said softly, "can I talk to you?" "Of course," I replied, a little surprised. "Come sit." He didn't move right away. Instead, he walked over to the window, looked out into the dark, and then turned back to face me. "I need to say something I should have said a long time ago, and I need you to just listen." I felt a strange tightness in my stomach. I nodded slowly, unsure of what was coming. He sat beside me on the bed, closer than usual. I could feel the heat of his body. We didn't speak for a few seconds. Then he reached out and gently took my hand. It wasn't like when he was a little boy, clinging to me because he was afraid of thunderstorms. This was different. There was an intention behind it, a weight. "Losing Dad," he began, "made me realize how much time we let pass, how much we never say to the people we love." I felt my throat tighten. I squeezed his hand, not trusting my voice just yet. "There's something I've carried with me for a long time," he continued. "Feelings, questions, regrets. And now that it's just the two of us, I can't keep pretending they're not there." His words hung in the air like fog. I looked at him, really looked at him. The lines near his eyes, the tiredness, the grief, but also something else. Vulnerability. "Steve," I whispered, "you can tell me anything. You know that." He took a deep breath. "That's just it, Mom. I don't know if I can. Because what I'm feeling, it's not what you'd expect. It's not what I expected." The room suddenly felt warmer. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears. My fingers trembled just slightly where they curled around his. "I'm scared you'll be hurt." or ashamed, or you'll never look at me the same way again." I pulled my hand from his, only to cradle his cheek with it. "Steve, nothing you say could ever make me love you less. You're my son." He closed his eyes for a moment, leaning into my palm like he needed that touch more than air. "I loved Dad," he said. "I still do. But the truth is, I've been looking at you differently for a long time. Not in a way that's wrong or ugly, just different. You're not just my mom. You're a woman. A strong, beautiful, complicated woman who's carried this family through everything. And I've seen sides of you lately, how you cared for Dad, how you held yourself up, that made me feel things I didn't expect." I pulled my hand away slowly, not in anger, but in uncertainty. I turned my body slightly, needing space to think, to breathe. He didn't move. The silence stretched. I felt so many things at once, brief, confusion, warmth, guilt, but also a strange kind of understanding, an ache I hadn't acknowledged since my husband got sick. I didn't respond right away. I didn't know how. Instead, I reached for the blanket draped across the bed and pulled it over my lap. He shifted a little closer, not touching, but close enough for me to feel his presence like static electricity. "Steve," I said finally, "what do you want from me right now?" He met my gaze. "I don't know. I just wanted to be honest. I needed to tell you. And I needed to know if you've ever felt something, anything too." That's when I realized my hands were trembling. I'd looked into his face, so open, so raw, and I didn't see a child. I saw a man who had just buried his father. A man who was searching for connection, for clarity, maybe even for comfort. And something in me, something buried deep for years, stirred. But I couldn't speak yet, not until I understood what it all meant. He reached up, gently brushing a tear from my cheek. I hadn't even realized I was crying. "Whatever happens," he said, his voice low, "I still love you. I always will. Nothing has to change, but I needed to be real with you tonight." The weight of his confession lingered like incense in the room, thick, fragrant, impossible to ignore. And so we sat in silence, two grieving hearts navigating something no one had prepared us for. But that night was only the beginning. The night stretched long after that conversation, though no more words passed between us. Steve eventually stood, gently kissed my forehead, and said he was going downstairs to sleep on the couch. I nodded, still unable to make sense of all the emotions pulsing through me. I lay awake for hours. Every memory of Steve as a boy came rushing in. His tiny hand gripping mine on his first day of school. The way he used to fall asleep on my chest during thunderstorms. The proud look on his face when he graduated college, when he got his first job, when he stood beside his father through the darkest days. But now, he was a man who had just laid his father to rest, a man who had looked at me with a confession that still echoed in my bones. At some point I must have fallen asleep, because I woke to the soft clatter of dishes downstairs. The sun was filtering in through the sheer curtains. For a moment, I forgot everything, and then it all came flooding back. I threw on my robe and went down. Steve stood barefoot in the kitchen, brewing coffee, 2 cups already set on the counter. He turned when he heard me, offering a quiet smile that held both hesitation and hope. "Morning," he said softly. "Morning," I replied, my voice a bit hoarse. "You didn't have to make coffee." "I wanted to. Thought we could talk. If you're ready." I nodded. "Let me just wash my face." When I came back, he was seated at the table, the morning paper untouched beside him. I sat across from him. The kitchen felt familiar, but something about it had shifted, or maybe it was us who had changed. We sipped in silence for a while. Then I spoke. "Steve, what you said last night, it caught me off guard, not because I'm angry or upset. I'm not, but because I never thought we'd have a moment like that. A moment where everything inside gets cracked open." He looked at me carefully. "Do you hate me for saying it?" "No," I said quickly. "Never. You were brave to say it. Honest. I admire that." He let out a long breath, like he'd been holding it since last night. I didn't want to keep pretending. I didn't want to just smile through our grief and go back to my life, always wondering if I'd missed something real between us. His words pulled at something in me. Not lust, not confusion, but a kind of emotional intimacy I hadn't felt in years. Not since Thomas had fallen ill. Maybe even before that. "You said you've been feeling this for a while," I asked, keeping my voice calm. He nodded. "Yeah. At first, I thought it was just admiration. Then, during Dad's illness, you were so strong, so present. There were nights I couldn't sleep, and I'd lie in bed thinking about how much you carry, and how beautiful you are when you're trying not to cry." I closed my eyes for a moment, taking in his words. No one had looked at me like a woman in a long time. Not really. Not since the early years of my marriage. Not since the weight of caregiving and life aged me faster than the calendar did. "I'm not who I was, Steve," I said. "I'm 75. I'm a widow. I've got aches and tired bones, and you're still the most beautiful woman I know," he said, cutting me off. "And it's not about age or appearances. It's the way you talk to people. The way you listen. The way your hands comfort. That's what I see. That's what I feel drawn to." I didn't know what to say to that. My heart was racing again, just like it had the night before. And then he said something that truly caught me off guard. "I remember one night," he said, eyes down now, fingers tracing the edge of his cup. "I was 16. You had just come home from your shift. You didn't know I was awake. You were standing in front of the bathroom mirror, brushing your hair out of its bun. You looked so tired, but something about you in that moment, I don't know. It stuck with me. I saw you, not just as my mom, but as someone real. Someone I wanted to protect, too. That memory hit me like a wave. I remembered that night. I remembered being too exhausted to even cry. I felt guilty," he continued, "for years. For noticing. For feeling. But after Dad passed, I couldn't keep pretending it was just a passing thought." I reached across the table and placed my hand over his. "I felt something last night," I admitted. "When you took my hand, when you looked at me, I felt something stir in me. Something I hadn't felt in a long time. But I didn't know what to do with it. I still don't." He looked up at me, his eyes a little red, a little glassy. "You don't have to do anything," he said. "I just needed you to know. Because whatever happens, I need our bond to be real. Not one full of masks and silence." I gave his hand a gentle squeeze. "I appreciate your honesty, Steve. And I want you to know, I don't see you differently. I see you more clearly. And maybe, just maybe, I see myself more clearly, too." We sat there as the morning sun shifted, casting golden light on the walls that had heard so much, seen so much. Eventually, I stood and began tidying up the kitchen. Steve helped. Our fingers brushed a few times, nothing dramatic, but those touches lingered. That day passed quietly. No grand declarations. no decisions made. But something unspoken lingered between us, soft as a whisper. Later that evening, I heard a knock on my bedroom door. Just one knock, then silence. I opened it. Steve stood there, barefoot again, eyes filled with that same vulnerability. He didn't say a word, just stepped in and closed the door behind him. He locked it, just like he did the night before. But this time, I didn't feel afraid. This time, I was ready to hear everything. The air in the room felt warmer, heavier, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Steve didn't speak at first. He stood with his back to the door, his eyes scanning the room as though seeing it for the first time. My perfume still lingered faintly in the air, mingled with the quiet hum of the ceiling fan. The late evening light cast long shadows across the floor. I sat down on the edge of the bed, just like the night before, and waited. He took a slow step forward, then another. Finally, he stood in front of me, close enough that I could feel the subtle tension in the air between us, something fragile, something uncertain, something undeniably real. "I didn't come in here to make anything harder," he said gently. But I couldn't sleep last night. I kept replaying our conversation in my head. "Me too," I whispered. "All day." He sat beside me, and for a few seconds, neither of us moved. The only sound was the soft ticking of the clock on the dresser. It had belonged to Thomas, and now it seemed to be marking time for something none of us could have ever anticipated. Steve looked over at me, his voice just above a whisper. "Can I ask you something?" "Go ahead." He paused. "Do you ever feel like you've been someone's wife and someone's mother for so long, you forgot how to be just you?" His question struck a chord deep inside me. I nodded slowly. "Every day." He shifted slightly on the bed so he could face me more fully. "Because that's how I see you now. Just you. Not in a disrespectful way. Not to forget who you've been to me. But to finally see the woman who's always been underneath all that." I swallowed the lump in my throat. "Thomas was a good man," I said, "but in our later years we became routine. The spark faded, and then his illness changed everything. I became his nurse more than his partner. I gave up things, my own feelings, even my needs. I didn't complain, but I started to forget what it felt like to be touched, just to be cherished, to be seen." Steve's hand rested on mine again, and this time I didn't pull away. His thumb moved in slow, reassuring circles across the back of my hand. "You deserve to be seen," he said, "and heard, and held." We both sat in that stillness, a quiet storm swirling just beneath the surface of our words. I looked over at him. "You're grieving too, Steve. You lost your father." "I know, and I miss him. But I think I've been grieving longer than that. For years, actually. For everything unsaid between us. And for you, for how alone you seemed, even when you were in the same room." Those words went straight through me. He had seen it, the loneliness, the quiet ache I thought I'd hidden so well. Steve leaned in just slightly, his voice still low. "I know there's a line between what we've always been and what this is, but there's something in me that needs to care for you the way you've cared for everyone else your whole life." I felt his forehead brush lightly against mine. Not a kiss, just a gesture of closeness, a seeking. His hands moved to cradle mine gently, waiting. I didn't move away. I couldn't. Something inside me was unfolding, a part of me that had been dormant for decades. I felt vulnerable, yet peaceful. Afraid, but not of him. Afraid of how right it felt. I don't know what this means, I admitted. I don't know what it would look like beyond tonight. It doesn't have to be anything, he said. We're allowed to just feel, to honor this moment, to not be alone for one night. His arms wrapped around me then, carefully, respectfully. I rested my head on his shoulder, letting the years of loss, confusion, and exhaustion melt against the comfort of his embrace. We didn't rush anything. There was no desperation, no urgency. Just closeness, gentle touches, long, quiet pauses. We spoke in whispers about memories, his childhood, my early days with Thomas, the things we missed, the things we regretted, the things we never thought we'd say out loud. At one point, he reached up and tucked a strand of hair behind my ear. "You're still so beautiful," he said, "so radiant." I chuckled softly, brushing a tear from my cheek. "I feel old. You're timeless to me." We lay side by side on the bed, not tangled, not frantic, just there, together. His hand never left mine. I don't think I've ever felt more deeply connected to another human being than I did in that moment. And for the first time in a long while, I felt cherished. Not for what I could give or do or fix, but simply for existing, for being seen, for being held. That night, we didn't cross any irreversible lines, but emotionally, we both knew something had changed. Something had grown between us that couldn't be unspoken. And as I drifted into sleep with Steve beside me, I knew that the next morning wouldn't erase what had happened. It would only ask us what came next. Morning light filtered through the curtains, softer than the day before. It danced gently across the quilted bedspread, highlighting the lines in my hands, the curve of Steve's shoulder beside me. We hadn't spoken yet. We didn't need to. There was a strange peace in waking up next to him. Not passion, not confusion, but stillness. A quiet kind of understanding that made everything from the past 2 days feel less like a storm and more like a tide that had always been moving toward this shore. He stirred slowly and turned toward me, blinking the sleep from his eyes. His hand reached for mine under the covers, and I let it. No hesitation. "Morning," he murmured, his voice still thick with sleep. "Morning," I sent back, brushing my thumb across the back of his hand. We lay there like that for a while. No pressure, no expectation. Just two people in the same space, sharing the same silence. I stared up at the ceiling, thinking about all that had happened, about the weight we'd both been carrying, and how strange it was that in grieving the same man, we'd found something in each other that neither of us expected. Eventually, Steve sat up and swung his legs off the bed. "I should probably make us breakfast," he said, rubbing the back of his neck. "Steve," he paused. "We need to talk," I said, sitting up as well. "Really talk about what this means." He nodded. "I know. I've been thinking about it, too." We met in the kitchen over scrambled eggs and toast. The morning sun lit up the countertop. I poured us both coffee, and we sat across from each other, a mirror of the day before, but with a gentler tension now. "Last night," I said, stirring cream into my cup, "meant something. But I don't want you walking away from this confused or feeling like you did something wrong." "I don't feel that way," he said quickly. "I don't regret anything. I feel closer to you than I ever have. Not just because of the emotions, but because we were honest. I don't think I've ever been this honest with anyone in my life. I haven't either, I admit it. But honesty can be a door we walk through, Steve, not a place we stay." He looked at me carefully, his expression thoughtful. "I'm not asking for a relationship," he said. "I'm not asking for anything you're not ready for. But I want you to know I see you now, as a whole person, not just my mother, not just a widow. You are a woman I admire, a woman I care about more deeply than I knew was possible. His voice shook a little near the end. I reached for his hand again. I feel it too, I said. But we also have to hold that feeling with care, because what we shared last night, it came from grief, from love, yes, but also from vulnerability. He nodded. I know. We both needed something last night, I continued, not just comfort, but connection. And while I don't regret it, I don't want us to pretend it didn't change things. Steve looked away, out the window where the garden bloomed. He used to help me plant tulips there when he was a teenager. He always liked the red ones best. I think what it changed, he said quietly, was how I see love. I spent years chasing the idea that love had to look a certain way. But last night showed me that love can be quiet, simple, just two people holding space for each other when the world feels too heavy. I felt tears sting my eyes, not from sadness, but from recognition, from the truth of his words. I don't know what happens next, I said. Maybe we just go back to our lives. Maybe we carry this night with us, tucked away where it's safe. But whatever we decide, I need to know that we'll always be honest, always kind. We will, he said. I promise. We spent the rest of that day together, not as mother and son in the conventional sense, but as two people healing. We cleaned up the last of the funeral flowers. We sorted through Thomas's things, laughed about old photos, cried over his favorite books. There was no tension between us, just a quiet knowing. When evening came, Steve packed an overnight bag. He was heading back to his place in the city. As he stood by the door, ready to leave, he turned to me. Can I hug you before I go? Always, I said. His arms wrapped around me tightly, longer than usual. I held him just as tightly. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. As he pulled away, he touched my cheek. You're stronger than anyone I know. And you're gentler than you think, I said back. He smiled. I'll call you when I get home. And then he was gone. The door closed behind him, and I stood in the hallway for a while, breathing in the silence. It didn't feel so heavy anymore. It felt full, as if the house still held pieces of the connection we shared. I went back to my room, sat on the edge of the bed, and looked at the same photo of Thomas and me I'd stared at just days ago. I smiled at it. Thank you, I whispered. Not because I was leaving him behind, but because he had brought me this far. Through all the pain, all the years, and somehow I'd left behind a son who could love me with the truth I hadn't known I needed. Some people will never understand what Steve and I shared that night. But I do. And he does. It wasn't about breaking boundaries. It was about finding healing in the most unexpected place, in each other. And that in itself was enough.